I
repeat
played
that?
Would you repeat that?
Yes, they said I had magnetic, unselfish.
She was once Hollywood's most radiant star, a woman of grace, talent, and quiet strength. But behind that picture-perfect smile lay a secret she carried for decades. A secret fueled by resentment, betrayal, and one of the most infamous feuds in Hollywood history. The woman who utterly hated Joan Crawford wasn't just another rival. She was someone who had once admired her deeply, only to have that admiration turn into pure loathing. Joan Crawford, with her striking beauty and relentless ambition, ruled the silver screen like a queen. But to those who worked with her, she could be cold, manipulative, and brutally competitive. And one particular actress, her co-star and eventual enemy, saw right through her charm. Their feud began quietly on set, sparked by jealousy and ego. But it soon exploded into the public eye, leaving an ugly scar on both their careers. For years, the world speculated about what truly happened between them. Was it envy over awards, roles, or fame? Or was there something far darker, something personal, that Joan never wanted anyone to uncover? Now, decades later, the truth has finally surfaced. Letters, interviews, and lost testimonies have revealed what really tore these two Hollywood legends apart. And it isn't what fans expected, because in the end, the woman who hated Joan Crawford wasn't wrong. She was just one of many who fell victim to the darker side of fame. And what she finally said about Joan before her death changes everything we thought. We knew about Hollywood's golden era. The rivalry between Joan Crawford and her unnamed co-star didn't begin with hatred. It began with admiration. When they first met, Joan was already a reigning figure in Hollywood's golden age. Her name alone could fill theaters. Her image graced every magazine cover, and her reputation as a perfectionist preceded her. To a young, rising actress just beginning to make her mark, Joan was everything she wanted to become. Elegant, confident, unstoppable. But what started as respect quickly curdled into something far darker once they shared the screen together. On set, Joan's charm faded behind the camera. Crew members whispered that she demanded endless retakes, not because scenes weren't perfect, but because her co-star looked too good. She would subtly manipulate the lighting, the camera angles, even the wardrobe to make herself appear younger and more glamorous. It wasn't just insecurity, it was obsession. Their first film together was meant to be a career-defining moment for both women. Instead, it became a battlefield of silent tension. Joan, accustomed to being the center of attention, refused to share the spotlight. Her co-star, strong-willed and talented in her own right, refused to back down. Behind every forced smile during interviews, there was resentment boiling beneath the surface. The feud reached its breaking point during a pivotal scene, one that required deep emotion and trust between the two actresses. But Joan, unable to separate performance from pride, turned the scene into a personal attack. She deliberately upstaged her partner, shifting lines, drawing focus, and manipulating the camera's gaze. When filming wrapped that day, the air was thick with anger. The younger actress stormed off set and vowed never to work with Crawford again. Word spread fast through the Hollywood grapevine. Reporters picked up whispers of a feud. Publicists tried to bury it, insisting both stars were dear friends, but those who were there knew better. The rivalry wasn't just professional, it had become painfully personal. Joan's jealousy didn't end with that film. Whenever her former co-star landed a major role or received critical acclaim, Joan would dismiss her success as luck or timing. She couldn't stand seeing another woman ascend in a world she believed she owned. Hollywood's competitive nature only fueled the fire, pitting women against each other for roles, attention, and survival. Years later, when both actresses were well into their careers, fate cruelly reunited them, this time in a project that demanded them to share the screen again. Producers hoped their tension would translate into powerful chemistry, and it did, too well. The hatred felt real because it was real. Every glare, every sharp line of dialogue carried years of bitterness behind it. By that point, the younger actress no longer hid her disdain. "I don't act when I look at her," she once said privately. "Everything I feel for her is already there." Those words would echo through the decades as the feud became one of Hollywood's most talked-about rivalries. Not for publicity, but for the raw truth behind it. Joan, for all her achievements, never escaped her reputation. Her insecurities consumed her, her need for control alienated her co-stars, and her desperate attempts to preserve her stardom cost her genuine friendships. In the end, the woman who once adored her walked away, not with envy, but with pity. What no one knew then was how deep the betrayal truly went, and how far Joan was willing to go to destroy those she saw as threats. Because the next chapter of their story would reveal something shocking. Joan Crawford didn't just ruin careers, she ruined lives. The deeper one looked into Joan Crawford's life, the clearer it became that her need for control wasn't just a personality flaw, it was a weapon. She had clawed her way up from nothing, and she wasn't about to let anyone, especially another woman, threaten her throne. To Joan, Hollywood wasn't just a dream factory. It was a battlefield. Every co-star was a potential enemy, every success a personal competition. Her feud with her former co-star began consuming her thoughts. Whenever the woman's name appeared in the press, Joan would find ways to overshadow her. She would leak stories to reporters, painting herself as the victim of jealousy and betrayal. Behind the scenes, she used her influence to quietly block the other actress from getting certain roles, convincing directors she wasn't right for the part. In an era when studio heads ruled with iron fists, Joan knew exactly how to pull the strings, but power has its price. The harder Joan tried to protect her stardom, the lonelier she became. Her relationships were strained, her children distant, and her circle of friends almost non-existent. Those who once admired her learned to stay out of her way. And the woman who once looked up to her? She became Joan's most haunting reflection, a reminder of the warmth and authenticity Crawford had lost long ago. The tension between them finally erupted years later, during an award season that both women were desperate to dominate. When her rival received a nomination for a performance that critics hailed as career-defining, Joan's jealousy turned venomous. She couldn't bear the thought of standing in that audience, watching her enemy win the honor she believed belonged to her. So she did something few in Hollywood could believe. Joan contacted the awards committee, volunteered to present a major category, and when her rival's name wasn't called, she arranged to accept the award on behalf of the winner. A calculated, humiliating move that stole the spotlight and turned a night of triumph into bitterness. Cameras flashed, applause echoed, and there she was, smiling proudly on stage, accepting an award that wasn't hers, basking in a victory that belonged to someone else. Her rival's reaction said it all. Silent rage hidden behind a forced smile. That moment became one of the most infamous acts of pettiness in Hollywood history. Reporters covered it for weeks, while insiders whispered that Joan had finally gone too far. Her actions didn't just embarrass her co-star, they exposed the full extent of her insecurities. And though Joan claimed it was just business, everyone knew it was revenge. For her rival, it was the final straw. She refused to ever speak Joan's name again, calling her the cruelest woman I've ever known. Yet, years later, when asked in an interview about their feud, her tone softened. "I think she was terribly unhappy," she admitted. "She didn't hate me as much as she hated herself." Those words struck deeply because they revealed the painful truth behind Joan Crawford's glamorous facade. Her hatred wasn't just directed outward. It was born from her own fear of fading, of being forgotten, of watching younger stars replace her. Every harsh word, every calculated move, was an attempt to survive in an industry that devoured its own icons. By the time Joan's health began to fail, the feud was long over, but the emotional scars it left behind never faded. Her former rival went on to have a long, respected career, while Joan's legacy became tangled in equal parts brilliance and cruelty. Hollywood may have adored her beauty and talent, but those who truly knew her remembered something else entirely, a woman consumed by the ghosts of her own ambition. And as the truth about her final years came to light, the world began to see Joan Crawford not as a villain or a victim, but as a tragic reminder of how fame can destroy even the strongest souls. As the years passed, the glamour that once defined Joan Crawford began to fade. The camera no longer adored her the way it once did. and the scripts that came her way were a far cry from the grand roles that had made her a legend. Hollywood, ever hungry for the next big thing, had moved on. But Joan refused to accept it. She clung to her image with desperation, meticulously curating her appearance, denying her age, and hiding behind layers of makeup and pride. Her rival, meanwhile, had gracefully transitioned into a respected figure in film and television. Beloved for her authenticity and warmth, qualities Joan could never quite master. The public began to see the difference. One woman aged naturally, her confidence unshaken. The other waged a losing war against time, trapped by the very perfection she had once built her name upon. In private, Joan's life was unraveling. Her relationships with her children were fractured beyond repair. Her adopted daughter, who once idolized her, began speaking out about the emotional cruelty she endured growing up in the Crawford household. To the outside world, Joan was still the epitome of elegance. Behind closed doors, she was haunted by paranoia, bitterness, and the crushing loneliness of a woman who had sacrificed love for legacy. As the spotlight dimmed, old grudges began to resurface in her mind. She would reread clippings from her glory days, still fuming over perceived betrayals, still convinced that the industry had turned against her. Friends who visited her in her later years described her as distant, still sharp, but consumed by resentment. She never let go of anything, one confidant recalled. Every slight, every insult, every rivalry, it lived in her forever. But perhaps the most heartbreaking part was that Joan's obsession with control never left her. Even as her health declined, she dictated how she wanted to be remembered. She burned letters, destroyed photographs, and cut ties with those she feared might reveal too much. In her mind, image was everything. Even if her real life was collapsing around her, her final years were a stark contrast to the glittering life she once led. The grand Hollywood mansion was gone, replaced by a modest apartment. The endless parties and flashing cameras were replaced by silence. She lived mostly in seclusion, visited occasionally by a few loyal friends who described her as proud but broken. When news of Joan Crawford's passing spread, the public mourned the loss of a screen icon. Yet behind the tributes and obituaries, there lingered an uncomfortable truth, that Joan's story was not one of triumph, but of tragedy. She had everything the world could offer, beauty, fame, wealth. And yet, she died surrounded by loneliness and unresolved bitterness. In the years following her death, her rival, older but still graceful, was asked once again about Joan. For the first time, she spoke not with anger but with empathy. She was her own worst enemy, she said softly. She wanted love, but she didn't know how to give it. She wanted respect, but she demanded fear instead. And in the end, she got neither. Those words captured what Hollywood had long refused to admit, that beneath the diamonds and designer gowns, Joan Crawford was a deeply fragile woman fighting demons no camera could ever capture. The woman who once demanded the world's attention was now remembered as both a legend and a cautionary tale. It wasn't just her rival who had seen the truth. The entire industry had. And yet for all her flaws, Joan remained unforgettable. A star who burned too brightly and, in doing so, destroyed herself. But there was still one final revelation to come. Something
hidden for decades that would finally explain
why her rival's hatred had run so deep. Because in the shadows of Joan Crawford's fame lay a secret that would change how the world remembered her forever. The truth about Joan Crawford's darkest secret didn't fully emerge until long after her death. For decades, the story had been buried beneath studio contracts, sealed letters, and carefully guarded reputations. But when private correspondences and testimonies from those closest to her were finally uncovered, the world saw a side of Joan that explained everything: the cruelty, the obsession, and the bitter hatred that defined her later years. Her former rival had been right all along. Beneath Joan's carefully polished exterior was a woman terrified of being forgotten. Every feud, every betrayal, every manipulation came from a deep-rooted fear of insignificance. But what few knew was that Joan's need for control extended far beyond her career. It touched every aspect of her personal life, including her relationships and her family. One of the most painful revelations came from her adopted daughter, who described a household ruled by perfection and fear. Joan demanded loyalty, obedience, and admiration from everyone around her. To the world, she was a glamorous star who adopted children out of kindness. Behind closed doors, she treated them like props in a carefully staged performance of motherhood. The emotional scars that left on her family were immense, and they painted a haunting picture of a woman unable to separate love from control. But perhaps the most telling detail came from a lost interview with Joan's rival, recorded years before her death. In it, she revealed what had truly sparked her hatred toward Crawford, not jealousy, not competition, but betrayal. According to her, Joan had once sabotaged her chance at a life-changing role by convincing a director she was difficult and unreliable. That single act cost her the opportunity she had worked her entire life for. "She smiled in my face while she ruined me," the rival said. "That's something you don't forgive." It was a revelation that reframed their entire feud. What had seemed like mutual animosity was, in truth, a one-sided war driven by Joan's insecurities and need for dominance. Her rival had only defended herself in a world that offered women little protection from powerful egos, and in doing so, she became one of the few who dared to stand up to Joan Crawford and survive. By the time this truth surfaced, both women were long gone. Yet their story continued to echo through Hollywood, serving as both legend and warning. Fame, after all, had been their greatest gift and their greatest curse. It elevated them, consumed them, and ultimately left them broken in different ways. Joan's rival found peace in her later years, finally able to speak openly about what she endured. "I don't hate her anymore," she said in her final public interview. "I just wish she'd been kinder. To herself most of all." It was a line that moved audiences everywhere, offering a rare glimpse of grace in a story filled with pain. As for Joan, her name remains immortal, but not for the reasons she might have wanted. Modern audiences remember her as both a symbol of Hollywood glamour and a tragic reminder of what unchecked ambition can do to the human spirit. Her films endure, her beauty remains iconic, but her reputation is forever shadowed by the darkness she created. And so, when people speak of Joan Crawford today, they speak not only of her talent, but of her torment. The woman who demanded to be adored became the woman everyone feared. The star who fought to stay relevant became a ghost of the industry she once ruled. Her rival's hatred, once misunderstood, now feels justified, not as bitterness, but as truth finally revealed. Because in the end, the world learned that Joan Crawford's greatest enemy was never another actress. It was herself.